Righteous Mamas is a podcast brought to you by The Signal. We are on a mission to transform our country. We tell the stories that matter, celebrate the power and hope of pissed off mamas who are building a better future for all of our children. Hi, I'm Cristina Sansun Ramirez.
Hi, I'm Muna Husseini.
Hi, I'm Martha Pincoffs.
And we are so excited to have you all with us. We're going to have a great show with some incredible guests talking about the crisis of gun violence and how it impacts us as moms and what we can do about it. Before then, though, I wanted to ask you all, how was I know we're just like a few weeks into back to school, and how has been back to school for y'all, especially because there's so much going on for our kids going back to school in Texas?
Well, I have a question too. How many emails have you gotten about COVID exposures?
I've gotten just one.
Really?
So far. Yeah. How many have you gotten?
One tonight. But no, we haven't had that many, to be honest, but we've gotten about 3 or 4 COVID exposure emails, but nobody in the kids' classrooms. So that's a relief.
I've also gotten one email from my daughter's middle school, and one email from my son's, so he's in a Montessori type of setup, but they have, infants all the way up to 2nd grade there. And for me, the harrowing part was that there was a baby in the infant room that got COVID.
Oh.
Yeah. And they had to actually shut down the infant room, and I'll just leave it at that. I had a lot of feelings getting the email, and then reading the email, I had even more feelings.
That's scary.
Yeah, I'm hoping, because we all have little ones that are, at least some of our little ones are under the age where they can get vaccines. So yeah, it's so scary because they're not protected in any way. I'm really grateful though, Santi school masks are required, and Santi also is really good at wearing he's so good at wearing it doesn't bother him at all. And so that makes me happy. And happy for us all. And he's so happy to go back to school, like so excited. My family tradition was, when school started, we didn't get to buy like a lot of new stuff, which I totally appreciate now. As a child, I did not appreciate it, but now I really appreciate it. So we got to pick out and go to the store and buy one new outfit when we started school for the first day of school every year. And so Santi and I did that, and it was like so fun to keep that going with him for something that I did when I was little. And how were your kiddos' first days back?
Well, I kind of missed both of my kids' first day of school because I went to Hawaii.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
So it was all good because, Mama needs her vacation, and even more awesome because I got to take my mom with me. But when I came back, I took both of my kids to the first day of their 2nd week of school. And it was really awesome to pick up my kindergartner, who promptly told me how happy he was and all of the amazing things he did. Because let me tell you about my first child, who never told me anything about school ever when I picked her up. So to have a child unprompted share all the details, I was over the moon. So no complaints from me.
My second child is definitely the bigger sharer of like what happened in the day too. And they're in a new school, so they miss their friends, but they're making new friends, and River's playing soccer with his buddies at lunch that is like totally bridging the gap for him. And so it's sweet. I'm so glad they're back in school. They also everybody's wearing masks. It's required at the school, and my kids have no trouble with masks. I think the grownups are much bigger babies about that than the kids are.
Yeah.
Yeah, my daughter's
I am a bigger baby
school.
about it.
My daughter's in a public school, and my daughter says she's one of the few kids that does wear a mask, and also she like moseys herself outside to eat lunch, and everybody else is inside in the cafeteria. And yeah, it's no issue. I mean, it's kids will follow the lead that their parents set. So
yeah.
Whether what is that? Is that an Eleanor Roosevelt quote? Whether it is or isn't is set on like whatever your mindset or your attitude is. I totally messed up that quote, but hopefully people understood the point.
Yeah. Well, I'm just glad all our kids are back, and hopefully they're all going to stay safe. And I'm super happy for them because they get out of our homes and like get to be with their friends. But thinking of getting back to school and kind of the other things that we're afraid of as parents and moms, I would love, Muna, like tell us about our guests we have today. Because there's a lot to think about when we talk about kids going back to school, and the issue of gun violence with our guests.
Yeah, I'll start by just saying my daughter is 13 now, and it was a conversation that we had around, okay, going back to school, wearing your mask was one, but gun violence and mass shootings in school is a real issue. And even with the pandemic right now, we've seen an uptick in violence, period, as the country opens up. So today we'll be chatting with Calandrian Simpson-Kemp and Shannon Watts. We're going to be focused on the hope that we shouldn't have to have and the power of motherhood as a superpower. So Calandrian Simpson-Kemp founded Village of Mothers, a support group for grieving mothers after her 20-year-old son, George H. Kemp Jr., was shot and killed in Houston in 2013. She's a vocal advocate for gun violence prevention and the gun violence prevention movement. We're also joined by Shannon Watts, who was a stay-at-home mom folding laundry when news of the tragic shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary flashed across the television screen. In one moment, she went from being outraged to engaged and decided to do something about it. She started a simple Facebook group to connect with other frustrated parents, and that grew into Moms Demand Action, a national movement with millions of supporters and a powerful grassroots network of local chapters in all 50 states. You can catch Shannon on Instagram and Twitter at Shannon R. Watts and Calandrian at diamonds_n_pearls_cal on Instagram, and her website is thevillageofmothers.simplesite.com. Let's hear more from Calandrian and Shannon.
Start the podcast asking the same question of everyone, and Calandrian, I'd love to start with you. Okay. And this is the question. So we like to find out how your mom or a mother figure shaped the way that you engaged with the world, the way that you engage with the world.
Yes. I'm a mother. I'm a grandmother. I have 8 grandkids. I have a mother of 2. I have a bonus daughter. This is my son, George, behind me. He was 20 years old. I have now a 32-year-old daughter. I can't believe she's that old now. I raised them here in Houston, Texas. And it's just, how do I say, with so much passion of a motherly love. And I just think about, man, it took me 9 months to grow my son, George. And here, God dang it, it took somebody's bullet less than 3 seconds to take him away from us forever. How in the hell did this happen? This is just jacked up. This is jacked up. And I'm just an average everyday mom, minding my own business, making sure that I was working several jobs to take care of my family, to make sure that George had everything he needed extra. And Dashe was in cheer and George played football. And we had one, 2-parent household, but the income was not that great. But I've always did extra jobs. I would teach George how to go clean out swimming pools, and he cut grass with his dad. I made him do some in and everything. And I was a nanny. I built church nurseries. I was just that mom that just kept my hands in something to provide for my kids. And so my fight that pushes me is just that, being a mom, and that somebody had access to a gun that took my child away from his family and to the world, should I say, and all the potential that he had to give. And right now I sit in his room. I am in George's room, and this is where I find my most power and my strength in any other place in the house. Before, his room was a shrine. I was so pissed off and mad as hell that somebody took him from us. We had to go bury George in a cemetery. That was not his bed. That was not where we wanted him to be. But I felt like I did not want to remove anything out of his room, because I felt like if I did, I was erasing George from the earth, and I didn't want that. But it took me last year for me to get sick, for me to really plummet with the trauma that I faced, suffering these 8 years without George and advocating and fighting. My body just went kaput. And I took his room down. It was very hard. My mom helped me do it. But I needed to do that in order for me to continue to move and not make this as a place of a shrine, but make this as a place of empowerment. Empowerment for me to use the fuel that I have, for the love that I have for him and other children, as well as my grandchildren, to fight, to keep fighting, to clear the path for others. As you can see behind me, these are George's football jerseys from Little League. And George signed all those jerseys, and those have not come down since he put them there. I would always tell him, George, I know you want to play the NFL. I know that's great. Wonderful. Yeah, rah, rah. But your education is important. I said, but I want you to know that you are important to yourself first. NFL may not come knocking at your door, but you are important to yourself. And I want you to know that your signature means something. And so he signed his jerseys that are still hanging behind me. So the love that I have keeps me fighting and keeps me moving. And I am a Texas mom, and I wear boots.
Well, I have so many questions for you that will come, but
absolutely,
the fight that you're waging benefits my kids, all of our kids. You have lived like my worst nightmare, and I have so much gratitude for your deep well of fight. And what a beautiful man George
Thank you
is. Yeah.
Thank you.
Shannon, I'd love to ask you the same question. Is there a mother figure who shaped the way that you engage with the world, the way that you fight?
It's a great question. And, I am a mom of 5. I have 3 biological children and 2 stepdaughters. And, I came to advocacy very late in life. I was over 40. I had frankly been sort of living in a bubble. I had a corporate job and had taken about 5 years off to blend the 2 families. And it was at the end of those 5 years when the Sandy Hook school shooting happened. But just in the weeks before that shooting, a Black teenager named Jordan Davis had been shot and killed at a gas station in Florida. A white man who said his music was too loud opened fire on his car and killed him. And Jordan was the son of Lucy McBath. And just a few months after I started Moms Demand Action, that December, in the spring, it was spring of 2013, someone connected Lucy and I. We ended up jumping on the phone together. And for me, that was really life-changing. Lucy has really influenced me immensely. We have worked together now for nearly a decade, first as advocates and now as in a different role, because I'm an advocate still and she is a congresswoman. And her mentorship of me, her willingness to sort of push me out of my comfort zone, to encourage me to make sure that we were finding ways to diversify our movement and our focus, all of those things ended up really shaping Moms Demand Action as an organization and me ultimately as a person.
That's amazing. You both have, you both have seen the power of moms to overcome and make sort of unbelievable things happen, even though the deck is stacked to make sure that we don't. Calandrian.
Mm-hmm.
Being an angel mom is someone who has lost a child to gun violence. Is that correct?
Well, angel mom is just the mom that lost a child. It didn't matter how they lost a child, but
Okay.
they did.
Thank you for educating me. Like I said, you live up and you live and wake up every day living what is my nightmare. And we talk about building the world for our kids. And I know that you have George and your other kids and your grandkids as the focus on how you are fighting every day for our rights. Can you tell us about George?
Absolutely.
Tell us how old should he be today?
Actually, George on July the 7th would have turned 28.
Okay.
So a lot of times I kind of reverse it to say that George is now 8, meaning that he lives 8 years with God. So I have to kind of flip my brain around sometimes to deal with it, with what the reality of this is. But George would have probably been, I'm sure of, married with children. George was going to diesel mechanic school because his dad used to tell him, George, I know that that's your mom. And George and I was extremely, extremely close. And when we lost George, my family was very concerned about me and if I was still going to be here or not. They wanted to know, how is that girl going to make it without that boy? Because we were together all the time. It went from mama's baby until mama's teenager. Then it started transitioning into mama's young man. And I would always tell him, you know, George, the world is not going to see you as my sweet George. They're just going to see you now as a 6'2" Black threat in America. And this is sad, but it's true. But I have to educate you about that. But I never thought that I would have to educate my child about a gun. I didn't even know to even look for a gun. I did not know. So a lot of times I felt like I failed George because I didn't tell him. We would see things in Chicago on the news and places that had high level of gun violence, but I never seen anything in Texas. So it wasn't on my radar. I just thought, oh, that's there. That's not here. But George was going to diesel mechanic school and he wanted to work offshore because he was very serious about his girlfriend and he wanted to have a family. And I think out of everything that really rips my guts out is because all of that was taken from him. And when after burying George, I just kept thinking George wanted a family. He just wanted, quote unquote, the American dream. George wanted to go to work. He wanted a house. George had a car. I mean, I had to laugh later when he left. I said, golly, George left all transportation. George had horses. He loved his horses. He had a bike. Yes, he loved horses. He had 4 horses. And when George was murdered at his funeral services, we brought his prize horse. Her name was Showtime. Oh. And he always said, Mom, you dress this horse up for special occasions and not knowing that George is going to be murdered. Only thing I can think of was how the impact of gun violence has affected our family, because I was getting everybody, you know, in line for the funeral service. And then I just froze sitting on my front porch. It just shocked me. And I said, oh my God, I forgot about Showtime. What about Showtime? And my heart just broke. And I was sad. And I asked my sister-in-law, because we loved our horses. That's how we spent a lot of time. George would use his horses to help other kids. And I just kept thinking about, oh my God, what about Showtime? And I asked my sister-in-law, would she please get Showtime dressed for the funeral services? And Showtime came. They brought her in a horse trailer to the church. Showtime was taken to the cemetery as well. And at the cemetery, she began to neigh, but also Showtime died 3 months after George.
Oh, wow.
She got very sick and we couldn't save her. So this little country boy here behind me had a heart for God. He was a family man. He loved his horses that he called his children, that they were also listed in his funeral program as his children. And as you can see, he's played football since he was 4 years old, and he loved the game. So he was a true Texas boy.
He sounds like a true Texas boy. That's a man after my own heart.
Yes.
The horse, I used to work with horses, and so I have a real special place for that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, Shannon, you were moved to start Mom's Demand after Sandy Hook, like you said. Can you tell us what it has been like to see the power of motherhood in the decade of building Mom's Demand?
I mean, it's been nothing short of miraculous. I really do think that women are in many ways the secret sauce to organizing. I mean, if you go all the way back to when women were first allowed to get involved in activism, it was prohibition because temperance was considered a Christian value, and men thought that women would make a good face for that. And they really could never put that genie back in the bottle, right? So for decades and decades, women have been on the front lines of activism, from suffrage to civil rights, child labor laws, drunk driving, all the way up to the water crisis in Flint, Michigan. And certainly it's no different with Moms Demand Action. What we have accomplished in less than a decade, it will be 9 years this December, is just truly astounding, right? Many social movements take decades upon decades, if not centuries, to make real progress. And so when you put in within 8.5 years what we've accomplished, I think it's amazing, right? We were David to the NRA's Goliath, and we are beating Goliath. The NRA is weaker than they've ever been as an organization. They're sidelined politically. They're bankrupt, not just morally, but financially. And we are larger than the NRA. We have millions and millions, about 6 million supporters. We have volunteers with Moms Demand Action and Students Demand Action who really will stop at nothing to change our nation's culture of gun violence. That includes changing laws. I know we're all waiting for this cathartic moment in Congress, which, trust me, is coming. But in the meantime, we've really gone state by state. We have passed background checks now in 21 states. We've passed something called the red flag law now in 19 states. 29 states have passed laws that keep guns away from domestic abusers. 20 states have closed something called the Charleston loophole. We've passed secure gun storage laws in 11 states. And 13 states have passed meaningful police reform and accountability bills since 2020. We have to remember that police violence is also gun violence. So all of these things are huge accomplishments. We also have a 90% track record of stopping the NRA, their agenda in state houses year after year for the last 6 years. That's things like forcing guns onto college campuses, arming teachers, permitless carry, stand your ground. And on top of all this legislative work, we have gotten companies, over 200 companies, to change their policies around guns. We have sent materials home with more than 1.5 million American families around securely storing your guns. And I'm really just sort of scratching the surface of all the work that has been done. And again, I'm a full-time volunteer. Our organization is made up of full-time volunteers who are doing this work because we want to protect people from the pain of gun violence.
So speaking of the states, the legislative successes that you've had in so many states, I think that is a really wonderful and hopeful thing. And Calandrian and I, and a lot of our listeners, sit in the state of Texas, where against the will of the largely bipartisan will of the people, they continue to pass more and more aggressive pro-gun legislation, anti-human legislation. So I would love to talk to hear from both of you. What is it that the mamas in Texas need to be doing more of, and how do we hang on to hope that this will shift? Because it starts to feel crazy making. But my mom has never been to a political rally in her life. The one political rally she went to was the Moms March. to the Capitol and carried my daughter on her back. And so there is so much consensus and so much room in this movement to deliver what the will of the people is. Why can't, what is it with the Texas legislature? I have to
I would like to say this. It's very frustrating. It's past frustrating here in Texas. To go and to talk to the lawmakers about what is important about Texans' human right to live. And they seem to close a blind eye to it. They see the tears of the survivors that come to the Capitol to speak with them. But here's the deal that I get excited about. And I think it's all about consistent messaging and staying the course. First of all, as moms, you know what your passion is and why you're doing what you're doing. So I would tell the listeners, hey, you have children, you want to make sure you keep them safe. You look at all the laws that are there that are crazy, that are dangerous, and you get the consistent messaging on what we need to do to change them. You keep showing up. I would just remember thinking, like, how in the hell did I get here? And I'm finding myself, when I got with Moms Demand Action, prior to this, I was so lost. So I can tell anybody out there that is lost and they feel like there's no hope, like, I don't know what to do. They need to get involved with Moms Demand Action, and you join the hundreds thousands that are here in the state. You go through the trainings, you listen to your state leads, you show up at meetings, and you think about your children, you think about yourself. And the messaging also too is like, we are not against guns. I am a mother that lost a child to gun violence. I am not against guns, but what I am against are these dangerous gun bills. And that is the truth. And sometimes I had to remind myself, man, why aren't they getting it? I'm so frustrated with Texas lawmakers. This is crazy. But then I remember what my husband told my son. My son was a free safety in football. That was his last position that he played. He did everything else well. But this young man made over 119 tackles a season. That means George was taking everything that was coming his way, and he was not letting anything through. Mm-hmm. So when I started thinking about these dangerous gun laws, my husband told my son one time, he said, son, let me tell you something. Sometimes the opponents are bigger than you. And George was strong. He would say, you cannot tackle everybody up top. It's too big. You can't get your arms around it, George. George didn't understand that. His dad say, if you take their legs, they can't run. So we was in one football game, George ran and he hit somebody and he just went, boop, he popped off of him. I said, George, he didn't listen to you. The next thing you know, George looked up in the stands and my husband kind of did like this. And that means George, go to work. George started taking the legs. They weren't going anywhere. So what I say to myself too, and I'm telling the mothers here in Texas, hey, we are a football state. We love football. Think of the NRA as the biggest opponent that you have, and that you feel like, man, they just bigger than us. They try to impart fear in us. But hey, get one of these red shirts. You will have an army beside you that will help you, that will lock arms, and we will keep chipping away at this little by little by little. And guess what? As Shannon mentioned, the NRA, they don't have any money. They don't have the credibility what they used to have. This organization, I think Shannon Wright is like less than 8 years old.
It's just under nine.
So look at all the chipping away, but it's been consistent, chipping away, consistent. So keep chipping away, get one of these red, beautiful shirts, join Moms Demand Action, come to the trainings, come to the meetings, and get on board. And if you need George Kemp's mom to come meet you at a training, I will show up and grab your hand and say, I will go with you, because we cannot afford to keep losing our children behind silliness. They don't have to get it. They just need to know we got it.
That's
and
right.
We wear boots.
And we wear boots. And we're not afraid to use them.
And
Shannon,
I would just add to that, it's important to remember what we've been doing in Texas now. I mean, Texas was there day one. Volunteers started doing this work. And look, these bills were sailing through the state house because of the NRA's agenda. And our volunteers slowed that down. It took years for them to pass open carry. It took years for them to pass permitless carry. We shined a spotlight on it. We educated Texans about what that meant. There were consequences. You have to remember that we elected people to Congress, people like Lizzie Fletcher, who are gun sense supporters, who beat Republicans who were NRA allies. We've elected people to the state house. And this work in red states is sometimes slower, but it is inevitable and it is happening every single day. And I always have this saying that, when lawmakers close the door, Moms Demand Action volunteers come in the window. And what they're doing right now is that even though permitless carry passed, they are going around business by business and giving them signage to put up so they can prevent guns from coming inside their stores and their retailing outlets. Because this is such a dangerous law, that we would allow people to carry hidden loaded handguns in public without any background check, any safety training, any permitting, right? It's absurd.
And logic.
Right. And data shows that in states where this is passed, states like Alaska, gun homicides have gone up. So lawmakers ignored 80% of Texans who support the permitting system there. Sadly, this will make the gun violence epidemic worse. It's why our work is more important than ever, frankly, in Texas. And we have to make sure that we're holding these lawmakers accountable. And you don't do that by sitting on the sidelines and throwing up your hands. You do that by staying in the fight and refusing to allow this to become the norm. I think a good example of that is in a state like Virginia. Virginia was considered a red state when I started doing this work back in 2012. Even the U.S. Senator was voting with the NRA, a Democrat. And like drips on a rock, we just showed up at every single gun bill hearing. We created relationships with lawmakers on both sides of the aisle. In 2019, we overturned both chambers of the General Assembly to be gun sense majorities. We've since passed over 10 good gun bills in that state. And that's the NRA's own backyard, right? So that's how this work happens. It only happens if you roll up your sleeves and you commit to the fight and you know that it's a marathon, not a sprint, but you know that at the end of the day, lawmakers will be on the right side of history. It just takes time.
Through the windows and get them by the legs. And
wear your boots too.
Wear your boots in case you have to kick down the door. Shannon, could you give us just a little snippet of the erosion of power at the NRA? Because we do talk a lot in the podcast about how foundational special interest money is in shaping some of the policies that are against all of our best interests. And certainly the NRA has been incredibly successful over the years in putting terrible laws on the books. But I think it would be great for everybody to hear about the erosion of that power.
Yeah, I mean, for a long time, the NRA was one of the most powerful, most wealthy special interests that ever existed in this country. And they really held sway with lawmakers at all level, up and down the ballot. And they were pushing their agenda through. And their agenda, let's be frank, it's guns for anyone, anywhere, anytime, no questions asked. They are no longer a gun safety or a hunting and fishing organization, a sportsman's organization. They are specifically a lobbying organization. And their whole goal is to sell more guns to profit gun manufacturers. And just like the Tea Party pulled Republicans to the right in the 90s, there is a gun group pretty much in every single state, depending on where you live. It's for example, in Colorado, they're called the Rocky Mountain Gun Owners. Those groups are almost always to the right of the NRA, and they are pulling the NRA to the right. I mean, back when we started at Moms Demand Action, the NRA didn't support open carry. They do now. They really seem to no longer support background checks at all. And certainly they're trying to force guns into schools and onto college campuses, and just to make it easier for dangerous people to get guns. I mean, they even fight to make sure that domestic abusers have easy access to guns. And really, they are struggling politically. They haven't had a return on investment in their election investments since about 2010. They've spent tens and tens of millions of dollars on elections and not had a great return. They have also been weakened by investigations into the organization. They call themselves a nonprofit, but they certainly don't behave like one. Their CEO makes millions of dollars, spends nonprofit money on expensive Italian suits from Beverly Hills, private jet travel to the Bahamas, has tried to buy mansions that he calls safe homes on Dallas golf courses. I mean, again, this doesn't sound like an average nonprofit. And thankfully, attorney generals have taken notice of that and are investigating them. And then recently, the NRA was laughed out of bankruptcy court when they tried to claim that they needed to be absolved of all their debt. And just in the last week, 3 NRA board members have resigned because the NRA is unable to insure them. It's called directors and operators insurance, and they're no longer able to procure that. So it's been interesting to watch their decline. Now, they're losing power, but there are certainly still lawmakers who are playing from their hymnal, right? Even years and years later. If you look at this issue in general, I think we all think of it as a polarizing issue. It's actually not. 90% of Americans support stronger gun laws. 89% of Republicans, 87% of gun owners all support things like a background check on every gun sale. Really, the only place where it's polarizing is in the U.S. Senate, where some of those lawmakers are still doing the NRA's bidding. They're worried about being primaried. Some of them actually believe it. There are a lot of different reasons. But I think it's an interesting factoid to look at Congress in general, because, again, back when President Obama was elected, about a quarter of all Democrats in Congress had an A rating from the NRA. Today, none do. The last one lost his seat in Minnesota in 2020. And so that is how you make progress. We need Republicans to be on the right side of the issue too. And that's why we're a nonpartisan organization motivated by data and facts. And we're always letting the research drive the policies we support. But it's going to take a while, right? This doesn't happen overnight. It takes several election cycles to get everyone on the right side of this. But it is helpful that the NRA is weaker than they've ever been at a moment where we finally have a president and a Congress, at least a majority, a very slim one, but that is willing to do the right thing.
It occurs to me that by the use, their major tactic is fear. Like, they make us feel afraid of one another, and by so doing, they make us so much less safe. Not just with the freewheeling guns, but with the attitude of being afraid of one another. It's
absolutely. I mean, but that's how they sell guns, right? They foment fear. They prey on chaos. They manipulate people to believe that a gun will make them safer. I mean, it's why they were able to successfully stamp out any funding for gun violence prevention research for so many decades through Congress, because they knew the data would show that guns actually don't make people safer. They make you less safe, and they don't want people to know that.
Right. And the storytelling is that much more corrosive. I imagine, I wish that we didn't live in a world where this is true, but I imagine that you have both been underestimated in this fight and in life in general. And I know that is true for me and our listeners too. I would love if you could share a time when you have taken the underestimation and told them to shove it.
Well,
you first, Calandrian.
Look, well, sweet Calandrian.
Oh, sorry.
Believe it or not, I used to be a very shy girl coming up as a child and a teenager. I cried all the time. My little poor feelings would be so hurt just at the drop of a dime. And I would cry all the time. He was like, "What are you crying for?" I'm like, I don't know. I'm just crying. I don't know. When I first got into Moms Demand Action, I remember going to Central Market for one of the meetings, and I kind of like spaced out. I was watching all of the meeting was upstairs, and so you still can see out in the grocery store. And I just remember seeing all the mothers down there on a Saturday. They're shopping for groceries for their families, and I'm sitting up there in the damn meeting because I don't have my son. I'm like, this is fucked up. This is truly fucked up. And I just kept crying. And see that crying stuff it was kicking in. Then I said, okay, they said we got to go to Austin for Advocacy Day. We got to go talk to the lawmakers. And I'm like, a law who? I just spent the last talk to the undertaker. I see them people in suits, but I don't know them. I mean, I don't even know really think about what they do, to be honest. I was so involved with raising my family, trying to make $1 every day. I didn't have time to think about a lawmaker. But when my son was murdered, okay, this is somebody I need to know. So I just remember gathering the angel moms and everything. We took the trip down there to Austin, and everything just looked so massive because my heart was sinking so deep in my shoes. And I just kept thinking, how am I going to tell these people that seem so powerful what they need to do? And I almost kind of like felt like, will you please, can you? One of those kind of things. And then I just felt the spirit of my son like, Mama, really? Get it together. Are you serious? And then but to be honest with you, like having all these, and when I looked up from the steps of the Capitol, I got so empowered that I was like, I can do this. Because when I raised my head up and I had my paper and I was shaking, I didn't know what I was going to say, how this stuff was going to come out. But when I looked up and I saw all of the red shirts, mothers from all across Texas was there, then my intimidation of these lawmakers it turned into power. And I said, never would I have imagined leaving my son's grave, would I be able to stand before anybody, yet alone to have a sea of red shirts, to know that they were there all along and to have that kind of support. So once I gave that speech and we had the fellowship with all the moms, and I was like, you know what? I'm not afraid anymore because George wanted me to let them know that he was here. Mm-hmm. All the other children all the other children that lost their lives, they need me to let them know that they were here. All the angel moms that could not yet speak needed me to speak to let them know that their children belong here. And I started thinking about my grandson, Evan. Evan was 4 when George was murdered, and they were so close. George would take him outside and play football. They would run horses. But the power came when I thought about Evan, because one day when I picked him up from football practice, he said, Nana, where's Uncle? I dropped my throat. I just said, do I lie to him or do I tell him the truth? And I just said, Evan, Uncle is not coming back. And he said, well, Nana, why not? He didn't like living with us. I said, no, Uncle loved living with us. Somebody chose to take a gun and they took Uncle from us. And then he says, Nana, when I get older, are they going to put me in a box like my uncle? I paused and I said, hell no, they will not. Because your Nana, I'm going to make sure that I'm clearing the path so that you have the right to live. And you are going to be an old man with children. That's what your Nana's got. I'm going to ensure. So that intimidation of the NRA, we was at a park one day and they had their AK-47s. They were out there and I was like, you know what? I don't even care. Have your guns. Don't matter to me. When we was in Virginia and I was on the Mike Bloomberg's, that was a bus tour, and that was the very last stop. They was out there shouting. They had the KKK signs, and I've never experienced nothing like the 60s in my life. And I felt like, oh boy, this stuff is really real. I only read about this stuff, but now this is happening to me. It happened to my grandparents, but to me in this day and age, they said, Miss Kemp, I am so sorry that you had to encounter this. And I took that stage knowing, and this is the honest to God's truth, that's why I would never be intimidated ever again. They stood there at the window with the KKK signs and the photos in the white sheet with the noose.
Calandrian,
Yeah.
that is unimaginable.
Yes. And I stood there and I looked at the window and I turned back around and my husband didn't even know what I was thinking. I said, you know what? I'm going to take that stage regardless of not. Whatever's going to be, it's going to be. But I told the supporters there, I said, listen, let me tell you something. They have the right, because we in America, to say whatever they want to say. They have the right to protest. That is fine. But have you ever heard the scream of a mother that has got the news that her child is no longer here, that has been taken by gun violence? So that what they're doing out there doesn't intimidate me, doesn't bother me, because I have a message, I have something to say. And I'm gonna let you know that George Kemp was here. So all my years of journeying with Shannon and having the privilege and opportunities to go here and go there and speak about gun violence, not just for my son, but for George Kemp's mother, I'm not bothered and I'm never intimidated ever again.
I love that so much,
Thank
Calandrian.
you.
You know, I, like so many volunteers, have been threatened, shown up at events where there are almost always white men carrying carrying long guns like AR-15s in order to try to intimidate or silence us. That includes recently in Texas, our volunteers, when they were opposing permitless carry, they were threatened by men who are open carrying. And that's sort of been an ongoing thing throughout this work. Obviously, my role as the founder of Moms Demand Action, my profile, the fact that I wrote a book and went on a book tour, and kind of the things I say on social media, all of that have made me in many ways the tip of the spear. I'm happy to serve in that role. It helps volunteers who are able to do their work while I'm sort of taking on the trolls and the nastiness of the NRA, and they frequently go after me and have gone after my family. But look, if Calandrian can wake up and do this work every day, surely I can too. I have never been impacted by gun violence. I don't want to be. And you know, to me, what Calandrian does is heroic. That she has been through this and has turned that horrific experience into activism to help prevent other people, including perfect strangers, not have to go through that same pain. And that's heroic to me. And so that's really what motivates me every single day.
Yeah. I mean, if Calandrian can stand on that stage with the KKK right there, I think we can all step into some power to make sure that as few people go through this as is humanly possible.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I have, let's see here. Oh, okay. I did want to talk about, so the mass shootings get a lot of media attention, rightfully so. And it seemed like at the beginning of the pandemic, we got sort of there was a reprieve from stories about gun violence in the news. As soon as we opened up the mass shootings, we started talking about those again. They started happening again. But what it seems like is that I am reading headlines that suggest murder rates are higher now than they have ever been before. And that what that means is that people in their homes are the least safe that they have been. Is that consistent with what you guys are seeing in the news and hearing in the work?
Yeah, so you know what we know from the data is that while stories about gun violence stopped because, as you said, shootings in public spaces slowed down, gun violence itself did not stop. In fact, 2020 was one of the deadliest years on record for gun violence. About 19,300 people were killed in gun homicides or non-suicide related shootings. That's a 25% increase over 2019. And then, as you said, as soon as people started going back out in public, then we did start to see these shootings again in public places. We saw more news coverage of it. But mass shootings and school shootings are just the tip of the iceberg of this country's gun violence crisis. It's about 1% of the gun violence in America. And when you look at what this country is headed for, I mean, I'm truly concerned as schools go back into session. About 40 million guns have been sold in the last year alone. That's on top of the 300 million guns that already existed. We know many of those are new gun owners who may live in states that don't require permitting, that don't require training, that don't require a background check. And so I'm concerned. I'm concerned about the trends that we will see. We know gun violence is up across the board. Unintentional shootings by children, instances of road rage with guns, workplace gun violence, the daily gun violence that we see so often in communities across the country. So it's a perfect storm right now. The pandemic exacerbated this epidemic and has just created unprecedented challenges for communities all across the country. I'm incredibly grateful for the work that we do to unlock funding. We've unlocked over $250 million for gun violence intervention and interruption programs all across the country in the last couple of years. This is unprecedented, that investment. But also President Biden, he has also recognized the need for this kind of investment and has invested money, hundreds of millions of dollars as well. But again, it speaks to the need for all of us to get off the sidelines, to get involved in this issue, to help close the loopholes in our gun laws, to address all of the underlying issues that contribute to gun violence. And that includes long-term economic opportunity, racial equity. Those are all things that we focus on as an organization. And I think that sadly, the gun violence crisis will be with us long after COVID has been solved.
It feels like that the gun violence is an expression, much like addiction is an expression. And, we have all of these expressions of a deeper sickness that we have to start speaking to and addressing. One of the things that we really like to talk about, and this will be one of the final questions, is empowering our kids. My kids are 10, almost 10 and 7. I walked into a room, we were at a friend's house, and we had not asked about guns. I walked into a room and they were 6 and 4 at the time, and they are playing in a room, in a drawer with a loaded pistol. So, but for the grace of God, I am not an angel mom. And it was a simple conversation that I could have had with the homeowner that said, hey, do you have any guns in the house? I'm okay with people having guns. I think that there need to be restrictions, and we need to have, and we need to be safe about it. But that's a place where I was not my fully empowered self, and it could have so easily turned into my worst nightmare and changed all of our lives in a split second. With a curious kid, kids are curious, they pick stuff up. And then the other, you talked, Shannon, about prevention and interruption, and I think there are conversations that parents can have with their kids, but then there's also awareness that kids can have of their peers. And I think it would be great to talk about how we do that together, how we make that agreement, because there's the activist piece, which is all of us need to be in on the activist piece and participating. But then there's the everyday way we live our lives and how we can get more empowered here.
Well, it's important to remember that children are children. And no matter how much we tell them not to touch guns, they are curious. It is always the responsibility of adults to securely store firearms. The onus is on adults, never children, right? As parents, we don't say, hey, don't touch the stove and then leave it on and leave the kids in the room. Guns, when you look at data from studies, it shows that even if you tell a kid not to touch a gun, even if they go through some kind of so-called gun safety education program, They are curious. Their brains are not developed. They want to touch and play with guns. They think they're toys, right? And we always have to remember that. And it doesn't matter what state you live in. I live in California, and I have so many people tell me, oh, my community, they're not gun owners, or I would know if my friends were gun owners. More guns are sold in California than any other state. Texas is a close second. And on top of that, there was just a study done that showed that 2/3 of California gun owners are not securely storing their firearms. So as parents, we have to ask. Anytime we send our kids to friends or families' homes, we have to ask how guns are secured. Well, first of all, are they gun owners? And if so, are their guns locked, unloaded? Are they separate from ammunition? As I mentioned, there's a huge influx of gun sales, and I'm really concerned about whether guns are being securely stored right now. We know even before the pandemic, about 4.6 million American kids lived in homes with unsecured guns. I'm assuming that number has gone up. And people are so worried all the time about school shootings. Most school shooters are students who get guns from their homes because they're unsecured. And so it is just so important for people to advocate for secure gun storage, to ask about secure gun storage. I would suggest everyone go to besmartforkids.org, where you can find more information about either how to get your school board to send information to your school families, or how to ask these questions yourself, right? It's just sort of a laundry list. Do you have a gate around your pool? Do you let your kids play M-rated video games? Do you have guns? And if so, how are they stored, right? It has to be part of that laundry list of questions.
Yep.
And then also too, for me being an African-American mom, since Black people in the US are, 2 times more likely to die from COVID and 10 times more likely to die from gun homicide than white people, is very concerning for me, because all I hear on the news, especially in our communities, is who's been shot, or you go into a candlelight visual. It's too much. It's too much. It's too much. So I do make sure that I let angel moms know to spread that message about what Shannon mentioned, asking those questions. Is there a gun in the home? Is it safely stored? Just that and I'll let them know you don't have a choice in the matter. You have to have that conversation, as well as I'm also teaching my grandchildren about, because when you think about in the African American communities, especially if they're in low income areas, they have all these convenience stores where kids are getting these guns that look like the real. I mean, they're getting toy guns that look, they're supposed to be water guns and BB guns, but they cannot tell the difference if it's a real one or not. And I tell my grandchildren, especially my 3 grandboys, I said, if you're out playing with your friends and you see one, I want you to get away from it as fast as you can, and you go run and you go tell an adult, because I don't want you to have to make the decision, is that real or not? Mm-hmm. I want you to remove yourself from that environment quickly, and you let somebody know. And they have it, by me repeating that over and over again, and they understand about what happened to their uncle. And I don't want anything to happen to them. So we have those conversations. And I also say, and I think it also alerts me on every area to be concerned about, especially that we in Texas and everything is open carry, concealed carry, permitless carry. It's a carry. I even want to know, do you have one in the car before you transport my grandchildren and take them anywhere? I want to know, where is that gun? Because there was a mother here in Harris County just recently. We had, it was an event. It was encompassed with crime victims. And this mother was there, and her 14-year-old daughter was visiting a friend, and they were gun owners, but the father left the gun on the table that morning when he went to work. And his son got a hold of the gun, and they were just playing with it, but he didn't clear it. And the child pulled the trigger, and it hit her in the chest, and she died. And that was preventable. So it's not about, you can't have them.
Yeah, and that boy's life is never going to be the same.
It is, no, he is never the same. It will never be the same. So we have to look at everything from a holistic approach. It's like Shannon said, it's not a sprint. It's a marathon. It's going to take us a while to get there. I don't care at this point if you in Texas, if you are under the sound of my voice of George Kemp's mama. I don't care if you have to crawl, if you have to skip, hop, roller skate, get on your horse, whatever by any means necessary, we have to keep showing up. We have to keep showing up. I always say it's nothing I can do for George, but I can do something for your child. I can keep speaking. I can keep showing up. I can keep chipping away at the feet. And Shannon say we can go through the windows if we have to, but we have to do this together. And we can't look at the biggest picture and go, oh, we're so fearful. Together we can do it. And we are winning. Just want to say that.
That's right.
That's right.
Thank you for fighting for my babies.
Yes.
I will fight with you. I have one last question, and it is this. Calandrian, can you tell me about that beautiful flower on your shirt?
Well, yes, I am wearing a white rose. I used to wear, sometimes I will put on a red one because of the love and the pain and the hurt that I have as being a victim. When I first lost George, I was always, everybody was like, you're a victim, this, crime victims paper, everything was a victim. And I felt like I was going in a hole of no return. I felt like that bullet was ringing over and over again, that it wasn't just that it killed George, but it was killing me slowly daily with the trauma. And so I decided one day, I said, you know what? I like that white flower. I love, for the angel moms, our flowers are red roses and white. And I put the white because it's a symbol of hope, that even though you feel like you're bleeding out on one side, but be empowered by the white flower of hope that keeps showing up and keep advocating, keep standing in the gap, no matter if you feel intimidated or if someone may hurt your feelings, or a lawmaker may tell you no, or they may just say, I don't care in your face. I still have hope that maybe not you this election season, but maybe somebody else the next election season will have the thinking that we need them to have. And so I just always keep hope in my heart every day. As you notice, the door is always open. I never close George's door. I keep it open because I'm constantly going in and out. Before, I used to keep it closed because the bathroom is right there and my room is there. And I had a hell of a time trying to get to the bathroom because I knew that door was closed and I knew George wasn't here. But I keep it open now. And I have my desk in here. This is where I can come and do my work because I know as long as that door is open, I can keep showing up.
Thank you.
And I thank you guys.
Thank you. Shannon, thank you so much for creating this.
Yes.
Well, you know what? It's only because of badass moms like Calandrian. So
that wear boots.
That's right. Next time you're at the Capitol, I'll meet you down there with my boots on and we'll get it done. Because we're coming for their teams.
But I have to say, Shannon, thank you so much for creating this organization because I'm no longer a victim. When I came to Moms Demand Action and they said survivor, I said, you know what? I am surviving. I'm not a victim. And I started feeling my backbone kind of straighten up. And I said, well, shoot, I'm going to keep walking now. I'm not a victim. I am a survivor. And then now I'm an overcomer fighter.
And a badass survivor.
Yeah. And one of them too. I'm a badass.
George Kemp's mama.
Yep.
That's what it is.
So in the interview, Calandrian talks about what it's like to be an angel mom, which is somebody who has lost a kid. And she talked a lot about George. It was really sweet the way that she talked about him. She had a picture of him like right behind her. She was in his room.
Oh, wow.
And so he's very much with her. And I mean, Calandrian and Shannon both talked about the importance of an ability to hold hope and belief, even in the face of things like a Texas legislature that will pass the unrestricted right for anybody to carry a weapon or a gun, and the power of groups of people to overcome the things that we don't want to see. There's no excuse for anybody to be on the sidelines. Everybody's got to get in and do their part and get to work. And the call to action from Calandrian's mouth to our ears is impossible to ignore. She has every reason to stay home and not get out of bed, and it would be perfectly acceptable if that was how she chose to live life afterwards. But instead, she takes the love of and the power of her motherhood and is trying to change the world for all of our kids. And, you know, it really made me think, it made me grateful, and it made me want to make sure that nobody else has to do that, because it's so preventable.
I read somewhere once that pain and trauma is dealt with in two different ways, right? Like one is like people take it in and it really impacts their ability to interact with the world. And then the second way is they take the pain in and then they transform in a way where it's like, I don't want anyone else to be impacted. And it sounds like that's really the superpower that she manifested, where it was like, okay, I've I've gone through so much pain and such a burden, and not for anybody else, not for anybody's kids, not for any other mamas, papas, parents. Um, and it is hard. It is hard to make that transition from holding the pain to letting it give you wings.
Mm-hmm.
But I find so much solace in that, and in taking that pain and using it to transform the world. And if that's what it means to be an angel mom, as much as it hurts, I appreciate the generosity. We need that.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want the sacrifice, but we need that force in the world. And I'm very grateful.
You know, I think for me, Santi, this is going to be his first year of school. Last year he was in pre-K and there were just 3 other kids in his class. Now there's 18. And to think he's 4 now, he's just 2 years younger than, or a year younger than many of the children that died in Sandy Hook. And he hasn't yet. I can't imagine we talk about like our kids coming home and talking to us about their day. And I know you two have already had to experience this, kids coming home and being trained about how to prepare and what to do, how to hide in their classrooms because of an active shooter. And to know that we are traumatizing our policymakers. The gun lobby is traumatizing an entire generation of school children. And that the fact that they hold in their hands the ability to make decisions that would change that. And also for all of the parents that have lost their children or will lose their children or someone they love to gun violence. You know, having run for office, I remember one of my other colleagues saying that the issue of gun violence, where 95% of Americans wanted some legislation passed and agreed that we needed legislation passed to address an agreement that there was just too many guns, too easy access, very few to no checks or balances, and that 95% of Americans agreed on that, and yet we couldn't pass anything.
Mm-hmm.
And that if there was anything that could show just how broken American politics was, it was the issue of gun violence and gun safety for our children, our babies. So I'm grateful to every mother that's been out there that's had to fight from a place of absolute pain and trauma. But it shouldn't have to be that way. And it is literally a choice that elected officials are making to care more about the gun lobby and the NRA than American school children.
Mm-hmm. That is plain.
This is why it's so important for moms and parents and families to be centered in politics. And that's why we'll continue to have these conversations. We cannot be left out of the conversations, and actually we have to flip that on its side. We should be the ones driving the conversation. So Thank you to all our listeners who continue to show up, and to all our listeners who, of course, every day are doing all the work, because there's so much more to be done.
And we are more powerful together than the lobbies could ever hope to be. They know that. That's why they try to keep us divided. So it's up to us to get together and to overcome that. We are the power.